Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here, and as always, I had planned to go ahead, push forward, and I couldn't. Reading more Blair Adams every time, I think maybe I can get a bit further ahead this time. Maybe I can just sort of skim over this part or just briefly mention it without having to really go into it. But as soon as I start reading it, I find out nope, every bit of it is trash. Right now, we're on the third part, building Christian character, which I don't know how I'm ever going to get through this. And to be honest, I don't know how worth it is. If I find something else, I may move on and just come back to this every now and then. Because, like I said, most of this is just them putting on an act. It's trying to make their methods, their way of life, sound better than it is, sound more biblical than it is. And so I would rather just get into what is actually showing what's going on and not all about putting on a facade, which is all this is, nothing else. We'll see. We'll see if I keep going or not. But right now, I want to get into what is sort of the premise, foundation of what this is probably going to be about. Because this seems to be all about discipline. And what made me do this is I realized it makes sense within their view. But it can seem really twisted if you don't believe their view. So, really interesting the way this is done because it doesn't really show you the premise. It more or less implies it, or just tries to make you ignore it. So, let's start off just talking about discipline. Looking it up online, looking at what others say about it, it's interesting. There's so many ways of looking at this, so many ways of talking about it, but almost everybody who's going to look at it reasonably and really compare all passages about it and really put it into theology properly, it's all about balance. It's all about having it balanced. Discipline is needed, discipline is helpful, but you can't let it go too far. As you saw, I put that verse at the beginning. That's what that's talking about. But there's also the question of how it seems to change slightly between what it talks about in the Old and what it talks about in the New. The Old Testament, you're within that context of the law. You're in the context of Israel as a nation and what God had planned for them, what he had them doing. However, the New Testament, it's much different. Now you're in that time of grace when the Spirit fills us, when we no longer have that sin on us. And things completely change. The law is gone. And one thing that's brought up often, which I think is a great point, is as you can tell, it's very similar because of the form of the word to what is done in discipleship. It's about training, teaching, not just punishment. But remember, Homestead likes to go along the Old Testament model more than most. So it's going to follow that way a bit more than it would in the New Testament. It's the first thing to consider. Second thing is, how far do you go with it? What is punishment supposed to do? You ask me, you read it in other places, I'd say it's supposed to teach consequence. It's supposed to let you know bad things can come out of these acts you're doing, these deeds that you've done, and really help children understand there are consequences for what you do. But showing them consequences in and of itself doesn't fix it. Let me read for you what caught my attention, and then I'll explain why this works in their teaching. On page 4, Blair said this: character, in brief, is something impressed upon us, stamped by the weight of life's burdens, cares, responsibilities, and even suffering or pain. But only as all those come to us in the softening context of God's love and blessings does this weighty side of life press Christ's own life into our innermost nature. And we likewise want to see impressed upon our offspring, stamped within them, until their nature entirely conforms to it, the image of the Lamb of God. Now, to explain this, one thing he talks about a little bit before this is sort of the history of this word, impressed. He takes one word out of the passage and tries to compare it to what that word is often used as in history. Not necessarily the meaning of the word, but how it's often used. But then again, not really how it's often used, but what it is often used within. What topic does it often come within? No, that does not define a word, but that's what he uses. It may often be used in that. Sometimes that can be why it's used, but it doesn't have to be, and that doesn't define the word. Something to keep in mind. But what he does is he shows how this was often used for putting a stamp on things and putting an impression on coins and things like that, where you're putting a seal on it in a sense and really making it that shape. Well, there's multiple ways you can take it. Was it done that way? Was it using that word because of the idea of showing an ownership? Showing how it changes you? No, what Blair tries to do is he tries to make it as though it's showing how it is forced upon you. As he says, it's impressed. It's stamped by the weight of life's burdens, cares, responsibility, and even suffering or pain. So Blair isn't basing this on what the passage says. He's not basing this on the word the passage uses. He's not basing it on the definition of that word in those times. He's not even basing it on a specific use of that word at times in those times. He is basing on it on a specific aspect of the occasional use in those times of that word. He's narrowing it down to that one little thing outside of what's said in this passage, plucking that out and basing everything on that. That's what he does in this. But no, there's a bit of a contrast here. After saying this thing of impressing it and putting the weight of it on it, he says this: only as all those come to us in the softening context of God's love. Note, that is going to give you the wrong impression. What it says there is not that this discipline, this stamp, this impression is going to be a softening. No. That this come to us in the softening context of God's love and blessings. This itself is not what's soft. This itself is not the love and blessings. But it's within a softening, but not within a softening context. He wants to use these words to make it sound like this isn't so bad, this is nice, this is kind, gentle, etc. Yet, the word he's using to make it feel that way is not being used to describe this discipline. It's the context of it. More brainwashing. But the kicker was that last sentence, particularly what's in the middle. And we likewise want to see impressed upon our offspring, stamped within them, until their nature entirely conforms to it. Until their nature entirely conforms to it. This isn't about correction. This is not about rebuke. This is not about discipleship. This is not about advising. This is not about training. This is about forcing. This is about brainwashing. This is not a choice. This is not what it should be in faith. They are forcing their children in this way. That's not the way to do it. However, I want to go down an interesting route here. I want to sort of explain why they do this. I want to, in a sense, offer a bit of pardon on them in a sense, but not the people teaching this, not Blair Adams, not the people writing this, publishing it, editing it, whatever they do. I'm talking about the people this is tricking. Because in the beliefs they've been caused to believe, this fits. They don't believe salvation by faith. Say it again. They treat faith as faithful. It's all about works for them. We even saw recently how Ozzy will go and try to make faith to be works. So, think about that for a minute. Why shouldn't discipline be what brings people to the Lord? Forcing them there. Because it's by faith. If they are being pushed this way, it's not going to be real faith. It's going to be fraud. It's going to be fake. It's going to be incomplete. It's not going to do any good. However, if you believe in works, that's different. Because works come out of discipline. That's what discipline is about. Not about what they believe, what they think. Though, if done properly, it can have a good influence on that. No, it's about what they do. It's about making sure they understand consequence of doing the wrong thing or doing the right thing. Then they're teaching it works because works is what brings salvation to them. Works are what discipline is for. Thus, discipline can be what saves your children. Makes sense, doesn't it? But only if you believe what they teach. But what's sad is this, as I showed, is trying to make it sound better than what it is. But you're not going to fully understand what's going on here unless you really get to be part of it. But by that point, you're probably going to be following their beliefs as well. They're just setting the stage here. That's what this is. This right here is wrong. Why? Because when you come at it that way, you are not only teaching the wrong way to do it, nor are you just putting the impression of a false teaching. You are convincing others to force false teaching on their children. Jesus never forced. Think about how many times he'd teach something, he'd say something. If people left, they left. He let them leave. He didn't expect everybody to listen to him. He didn't expect everybody to follow. He'd let them know, hey, you want to do this? Here's where we're going. If they turned away, he'd be like, okay, your choice. He never forced anything. When he looked at Peter and said, "Get away from me, Satan," he corrected him, but not by forcing him. If you believe in salvation by works, this could make sense. You believe in salvation by faith, this goes and prevents salvation. But even if you go by works, there's something you might want to consider. For anybody out there who's following this, going along with this teaching, thinks maybe works, let me ask you right now, within those works, how important, how significant do you find motivation to be? Do you think motive, purpose, the reason for the obedience matters? If not, how do you know anybody who believes differently than you won't go to heaven? Because plenty of people try to do good things, make themselves look good. If motive doesn't matter, that shouldn't matter. Even if it's just to make themselves look good. If motive does matter, how, when it's forced on them, can their motive really be in the right place? God bless.